The summer sun stretched long golden fingers across the quiet town of Maple Hollow, bathing everything in a honey-warm glow that made even its oldest secrets look sweet and harmless. But the whispers were never sweet, at least, not when it came to her. Miriam Claiborne, the widow Claiborne, had lived in that same old farmhouse at the edge of the town for almost a decade. Since the day her husband passed away in a sawmill accident that no one really spoke about anymore. She was a tall, broad-hipped woman with a face that carried more strength than softness. A body the gossip said was too wide to wed, and a heart she'd quietly buried beneath layers of self-protection. She worked her land alone, milked her cows, kept her garden in perfect order, and didn't ask for anyone's help, not even when the world tried to bury her under its judgment. Children would peek through the picket fence, whispering, "That's the widow Claiborne's house," as if she were a witch from a storybook. But none of those whispers reached the two little voices that mattered most that day, the high, bubbling laughter of Emma and Eli, the 5-year-old twins who ran toward her gate, with their hair sticking up and their hearts open wide. Their father, Daniel Reeves, followed close behind, calling out their names like he always did. But the twins never listened when they were excited. Daniel was a widower too. His wife had passed 3 winters ago, leaving behind the twins and a man who had buried love with grief. His boots crunched over the gravel path as he caught up, his sun-tanned face shadowed by the weight of raising 2 children alone, of never letting them see his nights of breaking. They had come to Maple Hollow for a fresh start. And it was supposed to be a quiet move, a small farmhouse, new neighbors, and no entanglements. But nothing about this day would be quiet. Emma had spotted a little brown puppy through the widow Claiborne's fence, a stray with floppy ears and soulful eyes, licking at a rusted tin bowl of milk Miriam had left on her porch. "Daddy, this one," she cried, pointing as though she'd found treasure. "We want this one, Daddy," Eli echoed, stomping his tiny foot with dramatic determination. Daniel chuckled softly, kneeling between them. "Sweethearts, that dog doesn't belong to us. It might not even be up for adoption." He raised his head to meet Miriam's gaze. She was standing on her porch, arms crossed, face unreadable. The sun caught her chestnut hair in a halo, but her eyes held a storm. "She's yours," Daniel called out, trying to sound polite, trying not to let the twins' excitement trample over boundaries. Miriam shook her head slowly. "Stray. Been hanging around for a week," she said in that low, steady voice that carried more authority than any shout. "But if you want him, I won't stop you." It could have ended there. He could have thanked her, taken the dog, and left. But something about her posture, the way she didn't move closer, the way the wind seemed to pull the world tight around her figure, stopped him. And something about the twins, clutching each other's hands and whispering, "She's pretty," made him look again, really look. The town called her too wide to wed, said she wasn't the kind of woman a man would marry. Only maybe the kind they'd pity. But Daniel didn't see a rumor. He saw a woman who carried her land like a crown, who stood against the weight of other people's opinions and didn't flinch. He stood, brushing the dust off his jeans, and walked to the fence. Miriam's eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger but in a lifelong habit of expecting judgment before kindness. "I'm Daniel Reeves," he offered, extending a hand. She hesitated before taking it. Her palm was rough with work, warm with life. "Miriam Claiborne," she replied. And just like that, the wall the town had built around her cracked, just a little. Over the next hour, the twins played with the puppy in the sunlit yard, their laughter rising higher than the gossips ever dared whisper. Miriam found herself smiling, an unfamiliar tug at the corners of her mouth. She hadn't had visitors in years. Not since the church stopped sending baskets. Not since her in-laws blamed her for a death she couldn't control. She tried to stay detached, watching from the porch. But when little Emma tripped on the uneven grass, Miriam moved faster than Daniel, scooping the girl up with surprising gentleness. Emma clung to her like she'd known her forever. Eli ran up and wrapped his arms around her wide waist, declaring in a loud, unfiltered voice, "You smell like cookies." Miriam barked out a laugh she hadn't heard from herself in ages. Daniel watched it all, something twisting in his chest. He had told himself he wasn't ready to feel anything. To let anyone close, to imagine another woman laughing with his children. But Miriam didn't try to charm them. She didn't soften herself to fit anyone's expectation. She just was. And somehow, that was enough. By the time the sun began its descent, the twins were muddy. The puppy had a new name, Buster, and Miriam had found herself sitting at a wooden table she hadn't shared with anyone in nearly 10 years. Daniel had offered to help fix the leaning fence, and she'd said yes before she could overthink it. The air between them was slow and warm, filled with the sound of crickets and children's giggles. But beyond the fence, beyond the golden light, the town watched. At the general store, old Mr. Weller squinted through his glasses as he told Mrs. Grover, "The Reeves fella was seen at Claiborne's today. Stayed past sundown, they say." Mrs. Grover's mouth twisted with judgment. "Him? With her? She's too wide to wed. No man wants that. Poor children, they'll be laughed at." And like wildfire, the whisper traveled, at the bakery, at the church steps, along the porch swings where people mistook cruelty for concern. But back at the farmhouse, none of those whispers mattered. Daniel stayed after the twins fell asleep on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket Miriam had knitted during her lonely winters. He leaned against the fence he'd promised to fix tomorrow. "They like you," he said quietly. Miriam scoffed. "They like the puppy." He shook his head, looking at her like no one ever had, with quiet, patient truth. "No. They like you." For a moment, the years of cruel words tried to rise up in her throat. All the too wide, too odd, too much that had been thrown her way. But Daniel's steady eyes disarmed every single ghost. "People talk," she muttered, not looking at him. "They always do," he said simply. "But my kids don't care what they say. And I don't either." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with possibility. Days turned into weeks. Daniel and the twins became fixtures on her porch, sometimes with lemonade, sometimes with mud on their shoes, sometimes just to sit and talk about nothing at all. She didn't try to be someone else, and he didn't try to fix her. Slowly, the house that had once felt like a cage began to feel like home again. The twins would run through the tall grass yelling, "Miriam, look," as though she were already part of their world. And every night, as the whispers grew louder in town, Daniel's presence grew steadier beside her fence. Then came the church picnic. It was tradition, everyone in Maple Hollow gathered at the green near the riverbank. Miriam hadn't attended in years. Not since the day she walked in alone after her husband's funeral and walked out with gossip clinging to her like mud. But this time, she had two little hands pulling her forward, chanting, "Come on, Miriam. Please." She wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy. But it was the first time she'd worn anything but work clothes in a long time. When she stepped onto the grass, conversation stuttered. Eyes turned. Mrs. Grover's mouth fell open like she'd seen a ghost. The twins ran ahead, Buster barking happily. And then Daniel appeared at her side. His hand brushing hers, not a grab, just a quiet assurance. She looked up at him. And he smiled that easy smile of a man who didn't care about whispers. "Let them talk," he murmured. People did talk. Loudly. Some stared at her hips, at the way she didn't shrink. Others whispered about how she wasn't right for a man like Daniel. But the twins didn't see any of it. They pulled her to the checkered blanket where the Reeves family sat, shouting, "She's with us." And those three words, silenced something deep inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. When Mrs. Grover made a sharp remark about some women not knowing their place, Miriam didn't flinch. Daniel turned to the crowd and said, "She knows her place. It's right here." And just like that, the rumor that she was too wide to wed began to crack apart in the face of something bigger than gossip: truth, kindness, and a love that wasn't wrapped in conditions. Autumn rolled in slowly, with orange leaves and cool nights. The fence Daniel had promised to fix became a porch swing he built with his own hands. The twins' laughter filled her yard. And one crisp evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Daniel knelt in the dirt, not with a ring box, not with an audience, but with a promise. "I'm not asking you to be someone else," he said softly. "I'm asking you to let me love you just as you are." Tears welled in Miriam's eyes. But not from sorrow. She'd lived her whole life being told she was too much for someone. And here was a man who saw her and said, "Exactly enough." The town never fully stopped whispering. But as the seasons passed, their words lost their weight. Children would wave when they passed her fence. Mrs. Grover eventually brought a pie she pretended was just a neighborly thing. And every Sunday, Daniel and Miriam walked side by side to church with Emma and Eli holding their hands. The twins grew up telling the story of how they'd chosen a puppy and found a mother in the same breath. And Miriam Claiborne, the woman once called too wide to wed, became the heartbeat of a family that fit together, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Love doesn't need permission from the world. It doesn't wait for approval. It happens quietly, in muddy yards and warm porches, in children's laughter and unshakable kindness. And sometimes, it begins with a puppy, two stubborn little voices, and a woman who finally lets someone in.